The grand atrium of Oak Creek Academy smelled of fresh pine and expensive perfume, but for Maya Robinson, it only smelled of the floor wax she was using to polish the marble. At 16, Maya knew the geography of the floor better than she knew the faces of her classmates. While they walked with their heads held high, laughing about ski trips to Aspen and winter galas, Maya kept her eyes down, her world limited to the scuffed toes of her sneakers and the gray oversized hoodie that swallowed her thin frame. Outside the towering glass windows, the Virginia winter was settling in, dusting the manicured lawns with a layer of pristine white snow. But inside, the heat was cranked up high enough to make the sweat prickle on the back of Maya's neck as she scrubbed. It was the first week of December, and the academy had transformed into a festive palace. A 12-foot Douglas fir dominated the center of the atrium, dripping with crystal ornaments that probably cost more than Maya's rent for the month. But the true centerpiece, the pride of Principal Marcus Thorne, was the Steinway grand piano displayed on a velvet-roped platform near the entrance. It was a magnificent beast of polished ebony, intended to impress the wealthy donors arriving for the upcoming winter charity gala. Maya paused in her work, her rag hovering over a smudge on the marble. The hallway was momentarily empty, save for the distant murmur of students in the cafeteria. Drawn by a magnetic force she couldn't resist, she stood up and took a hesitant step toward the platform. She knew she shouldn't. She knew she was invisible only as long as she stayed on her knees, scrubbing. But the piano called to her, a silent friend in a hostile world. She reached out, her trembling fingers hovering inches above the ivory keys, imagining the cool touch, the weight of the hammer striking the string, the vibration that would hum through her bones. She didn't press down, she wouldn't dare, but in her mind, she heard the opening chord of a melody her mother used to hum. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems our future janitor has musical aspirations. The voice boomed across the atrium, shattering Maya's trance. She whipped around, nearly tripping over her bucket. Principal Marcus Thorne stood at the top of the staircase, a cup of artisan coffee in one hand, flanked by a group of seniors from the student council. He descended the stairs slowly, his smile wide and predatory, the kind of smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. The students giggled, the sound sharp and echoing off the hard surfaces. "Maya, isn't it?" Thorne asked, though he knew exactly who she was. He had signed the paperwork for her grandmother's custodial wage reduction just last week. "Why don't you play us a concerto? Show us the hidden talents of the East Side." The laughter grew louder. A tall boy in a varsity jacket whispered something to a girl beside him, and she covered her mouth to suppress a snort. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked for an escape route, but Thorne had blocked the path to the service door. He gestured mockingly to the piano bench, his eyebrows raised in a challenge that wasn't really a challenge, it was a command to be humiliated. "Sit," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a silky, dangerous register. "Entertain us." Terrified, Maya moved like a puppet. She sat on the plush leather bench, her gray hoodie looking absurdly out of place against the elegance of the Steinway. Her hands shook so badly she had to clasp them together in her lap. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. They were waiting for her to fail, to poke at the keys with a clumsy finger, to run away crying. But as she stared at the black and white keys, something shifted. The smell of floor wax faded, replaced by the memory of her mother's perfume. The jeering faces blurred. Maya closed her eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. Her hands unclasped and floated to the keys, guided by instinct older than her fear. She didn't play a concerto. She played a single, dissonant jazz chord that hung in the air like a question. Then, she resolved it into a melody, a haunting, soulful improvisation of Silent Night. It wasn't the cheery version played in the malls. It was slow, heavy with the weight of winter nights in a cold apartment, yet bright with a stubborn, flickering hope. Her left hand rolled a complex bass line while her right hand danced, adding blues notes that cried out in the cavernous space. For 30 seconds, the world stopped. The giggling ceased. The whispers died. The only sound was the rich, resonant voice of the piano, telling a story of pain and beauty that these privileged kids had never heard. Thorne stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, his coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth, his smirk erased by genuine shock. He stared at the girl in the gray hoodie as if seeing a ghost. Maya let the final chord ring out, the vibration fading into a silence, so profound it felt holy. She opened her eyes, blinking against the sudden brightness of the room, expecting, she didn't know what. Applause? Apology? Thorne recovered his composure first. He set his jaw, the light returning to his eyes, but it wasn't admiration. It was annoyance, the irritation of a man whose joke had backfired. He cleared his throat loudly, the sound tearing through the fragile atmosphere. He clapped his hands together slowly, the applause sounding flat and sarcastic in the quiet hall. "Well, isn't that quaint?" Thorne said, his voice dripping with condescension as he stepped closer, looming over her. "Now, back to work, Maya. These floors won't shine themselves." The old music wing in the East Building was officially closed for renovations, which made it the perfect place for ghosts and for Maya. She had fled there immediately after her shift ended, her cheeks still burning with the shame of the atrium incident. This part of the school was forgotten, a maze of dusty corridors where the heating system rattled and groaned like an old man clearing his throat. The music room at the end of the hall was a cluttered haven, piled high with broken music stands and retired instruments, smelling faintly of lemon oil, old paper, and the peppermint tea that Mr. Silas Fletcher always brewed in the corner. Outside the foggy windows, the snow had begun to fall heavily, blanketing Oak Creek in white, but inside, the only light came from a single desk lamp casting long, warm shadows. Maya sat at the battered, upright piano pushed against the back wall. It was nothing like the gleaming Steinway in the lobby. Its finish was chipped, and the middle C stuck if you pressed it too softly. But to Maya, it was perfect because it didn't judge. She played with a ferocity she hadn't dared show earlier, her fingers hammering out her frustration, transforming the humiliation of Thorne's laughter into a stormy, complex melody. "You're attacking the keys, child. You need to persuade them." Maya jumped, her hands flying off the keyboard. Mr. Silas Fletcher stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane. At 62, with his woolen cardigan and a neatly trimmed gray beard, he looked more like a storybook grandfather than a teacher. He didn't look angry about her trespassing. Instead, he hobbled over and placed a steaming mug of hot cocoa on the bench beside her. "Drink," he commanded gently, his voice rough but warm. "It helps the nerves." Maya took the mug, wrapping her cold hands around the ceramic warmth. "I'm sorry, Mr. Fletcher. I know I'm not supposed to be here," Principal Thorne said. "I don't care what Marcus Thorne said," Silas interrupted, sitting heavily on a stack of old textbooks. He looked at her with a piercing gaze that felt surprisingly familiar. "I watched you in the atrium today. You have your mother's hands, Maya. And her stubbornness." Maya nearly dropped the mug. "You knew my mother? Sophia? Best pianist this school ever saw before." Silas trailed off, a shadow passing over his face. He tapped his cane rhythmically on the floor. "They see a janitor in a hoodie. I see a virtuoso waiting to be heard. But talent without discipline is just noise. If you want to prove Thorne wrong, you can't just play, you have to perform." For the next 10 days, the dusty room became their bunker. While the rest of the school prepared for the holidays with loud parties and ski trips, Maya and Silas worked. He corrected her posture, forcing her to lift her chin. He taught her to channel her pain not into anger, but into dynamics, softening the edges of her jazz improvisation, blending it with the classical structure required for the winter gala scholarship. They worked until Maya's fingers ached and her spirit soared. On a Tuesday afternoon, deep in the middle of a complex bridge section, the door creaked open. Maya froze, her heart stopping. Standing there was Sophie, the girl with the cashmere coat and the shiny violin case, the daughter of the school board president. Sophie was the golden girl of Oak Creek, everything Maya wasn't. If she reported this to her father or Thorne, it was all over. Maya braced herself for the eviction, for the mockery, for the end of her brief sanctuary. Sophie stared at them, her expression unreadable. She looked from Maya's terrified face to Silas's defiant one. Then, she walked into the room, the heels of her boots clicking sharply on the wooden floor. She set her violin case down on a dusty table and unclasped it. "You're rushing the tempo in the bridge. It needs to breathe," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. Maya blinked, stunned. "What?" "The transition," Sophie clarified, tightening her bow. You're playing it like you're running away. You need to stay in the moment. She tucked the violin under her chin and nodded at Maya. From the top. And try to keep up. Silas chuckled softly, sipping his tea as the two girls, one in a designer coat, one in a thrift store hoodie, began to play. The violin wove around the piano notes, adding a mournful, sweet counterpoint that filled the dusty room with magic. When the final note faded, Silas looked at the calendar on the wall, marking off another day of December. We have 2 weeks to turn that raw talent into a weapon. Are you ready to fight back, Maya? A secret at Oak Creek Academy spreads faster than the winter flu, and by Wednesday morning, everyone had the fever. It started as a murmur near the lockers, a huddle of students passing an iPhone back and forth, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. Maya walked through the hallway with her head down, clutching her cleaning supplies, bracing herself for the usual taunts or the accidental shoulder bumps. But they never came. Instead, the hallway parted for her. A varsity football player, usually the loudest in the crowd, looked up from the phone, met her eyes, and gave a respectful, almost confused nod. The source of this strange shift was a video file that had been uploaded anonymously to the school's private social feed late last night. It was grainy and shot from a low angle, clearly filmed without permission, but the audio was crystal clear. It captured Maya and Sophie in the dusty music room, the violin and piano weaving together in a complex, soulful duet that sounded nothing like a janitor's hobby and everything like a professional performance. The caption was simple: the real talent of Oak Creek. By lunchtime, the cafeteria was buzzing. Maya sat at her usual isolated table in the corner near the trash cans, trying to eat her sandwich invisibly. But the air had changed. She wasn't the target anymore. She was the mystery. High above on the mezzanine balcony, Principal Marcus Thorne watched the scene below, gripping the railing until his knuckles turned white. He saw the students glancing at Maya not with disgust, but with awe. He saw his carefully constructed hierarchy where the rich led and the poor served beginning to crack because of a girl in a gray hoodie. "This is unacceptable," Thorne muttered, turning to the woman standing silently behind him. Vice Principal Karen Vane was tall, severe, and loyal to a fault. She held a clipboard with the sign-up sheet for the winter charity gala. "Mr. Silas Fletcher submitted her name this morning," Vane said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Maya Robinson. Solo piano." Thorne snatched the clipboard, his eyes narrowing at the handwriting. "He thinks he can embarrass me? He thinks he can turn my gala into a charity case for the East Side." He thrust the clipboard back at Vane. "She cannot perform. I don't care how good she is. This school sells an image, Karen, and she doesn't fit the brochure. Fix it. Tonight." Later that afternoon, the tension exploded in the faculty lounge. Thorne cornered Silas by the coffee machine. The pleasantries were gone. "Withdraw her application, Silas," Thorne hissed, stepping close enough to invade the older man's personal space. "Or I might have to review the budget for the music department. And your pension." Silas didn't blink. He stirred his tea slowly, the spoon clinking against the ceramic with a steady rhythm. "She plays, Marcus. She plays because she is the best musician this school has seen in 20 years. Or do I need to remind the board about what really happened in 2007? Do I tell them who actually signed those fund transfer papers that ruined Sophia Robinson?" Thorne's face turned a dangerous shade of red, but he stepped back, silenced by the threat. He smoothed his tie, a cold smile returning to his lips. "Have it your way, old man. But remember, accidents happen when you're not careful." The school emptied out as the winter sun set, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the snow-covered grounds. The cleaners finished their shifts, the lights flickered off, and silence reclaimed the hallways. But the school wasn't empty. Late that night, the shadow of a figure enters the darkened music room with a pair of wire cutters. The metallic snap of a piano string echoes like a gunshot in the silence. The morning sun over Oak Creek Academy didn't bring warmth. It brought a cold accusation that would freeze Maya's heart faster than the winter wind. It started with a summons over the PA system during first period, a metallic voice that sliced through the quiet hum of the history classroom. "Maya Robinson, report to the principal's office immediately." The walk down the long, polished hallway felt like a march to the gallows. Students peered out from classroom door windows, their faces blurring into a mosaic of curiosity and judgment. Maya gripped the straps of her backpack until her knuckles turned white, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She hadn't done anything wrong, she had only played music, but in her world, innocence was rarely a shield against authority. When she pushed open the heavy oak doors of Principal Thorne's office, the atmosphere was suffocating. The room smelled of old leather, expensive cologne, and something sharp, like ozone before a thunderstorm. Thorne sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his face a mask of faux disappointment. To his right stood Vice Principal Vane, her arms crossed, looking at Maya with the satisfied expression of a cat that had finally cornered a mouse. On the desk between them lay a series of glossy photographs and a small, silver object that glinted under the chandelier light, the spare key to the music room that Silas had entrusted to Maya. "Have a seat, Maya," Thorne said, though it wasn't an invitation. It was an order. Maya sat on the edge of the stiff chair. "Is this about the gala?" "I've been practicing, I promise This is about criminal vandalism," Vane interrupted, sliding the photographs across the desk. Maya looked down and gasped. The photos showed the inside of the music room, but it was no longer the sanctuary she knew. The old upright piano, her faithful companion for the last 2 weeks, was a ruin. The front panel had been smashed open, and the copper strings inside had been brutally severed, curling outward like the frayed nerves of a dying animal. The damage was violent, angry, and total. "I didn't do this," Maya whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "I would never. I love that piano." "Miss Vane saw you leaving the East Wing late last night," Thorne said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "And we found this key in your locker during a random security check this morning. It's the only unauthorized copy in existence." "That's a lie," Maya cried, her voice cracking. "I was home with my grandmother. The key was in my pocket, not my locker." Thorne stood up, looming over the desk. "I knew this would happen. I tried to tell Silas. People from your background, with your struggles, simply cannot handle the pressure of an institution like Oak Creek. You lash out. You destroy. It's in your nature." He picked up a piece of paper and signed it with a flourish. "Effective immediately. You are suspended pending a police investigation. You are barred from school grounds, and needless to say, your application for the Winter Charity Gala is revoked. You will not be performing." Before Maya could respond, the office door flew open with a bang that shook the trophies on the shelves. Mr. Silas Fletcher stormed in, his face flushed a dangerous shade of purple, his cane thumping heavily against the carpet. He was out of breath, his scarf trailing behind him. "You will not do this, Marcus," Silas roared, his voice shaking the room. "I saw the photos. Those strings were cut with industrial wire cutters. That takes strength and tools, not a 16-year-old girl." Thorne sneered. "Control yourself, Silas. The evidence is irrefutable. The evidence is manufactured." Silas advanced on the desk, pointing a trembling finger at Vane. "She lied. She wasn't even in the building last night, but the digital logs will show who was. You think you can replay 2007? You think you can destroy the daughter the same way you destroyed the mother?" The air in the room grew electric. Maya watched in terror as Silas's fury seemed to consume him. Thorne's cool demeanor cracked, replaced by a flash of genuine fear as the old secrets threatened to spill out. "Get out," Thorne snarled. "Security. I will scream the truth to the board," Silas shouted, stepping closer, his eyes blazing with a lifetime of suppressed indignation. "I will tell them about the stolen funds. I will tell them you signed the—" Suddenly, Silas stopped. His words choked off into a wet gasp. His hand flew to his chest, clutching the wool of his cardigan. His eyes went wide, fixed on Maya, filled with a desperate apology. The cane slipped from his grasp, clattering loudly onto the floor, followed a second later by Silas himself. He collapsed heavily, knocking over a chair, his breathing turning into shallow, terrifying rattles. "Mr. Silas!" Maya screamed, scrambling off her chair to kneel beside him. She grabbed his hand. It was already cold. "Help him. Call an ambulance." Thorne stood frozen for a moment, looking down at the fallen teacher not with concern, but with calculation. Vane was already on the phone, her voice shrill as she requested paramedics. The next 10 minutes were a blur of chaos, the wail of sirens growing louder, the rush of EMTs bursting into the office, the static of radios. Maya refused to let go of Silas's hand until a security guard physically pulled her away. "You've done enough damage," Thorne hissed at her as the paramedics loaded Silas onto a stretcher. "You caused this. His blood is on your hands." The security guard dragged a sobbing Maya through the hallways, past the staring faces of students who pressed themselves against the lockers to watch the drama unfold. They marched her to the front entrance and shoved her out into the biting cold. The heavy metal doors slammed shut behind her with a finality that echoed in her bones. Standing alone in the snow outside the locked school gates, Maya watches the ambulance lights fade into the distance. She has lost the piano, her chance, and her only defender. Despair has a specific taste like stale coffee and cold ash, and it filled the small kitchen where Maya sat in silence, staring at her grandmother's rosary. The beads were worn smooth from decades of prayer, draped over a chip saucer on the table. In the next room, Maya could hear the rhythmic, labored breathing of her grandmother Hattie, who had cried herself to sleep after hearing the news of the suspension. The small apartment in the East Side tenements was warm, heated by a radiator that hissed and banged, but Maya felt a chill that went straight to her marrow. On the floor lay a duffel bag half-packed. If the police came, if they demanded money for the ruined piano, Maya knew they would have to leave Oak Creek. There was no fight left in her. Thorne had won. A sharp, urgent knock at the front door made her jump. Maya froze, terrified it was the authorities. The knock came again louder. "Maya, open up, it's freezing out here." It wasn't the police. It was a voice that belonged in a country club, not a tenement hallway. Maya unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door to reveal Sophie, shivering in her cashmere coat, her cheeks flushed with cold and adrenaline. "Sophie? What are you?" "Get your coat," Sophie ordered, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She looked around the cramped, peeling kitchen but didn't flinch. Her eyes were blazing with a fierce determination. "We're going back to the school." "I can't," Maya whispered, backing away. "I'm suspended. If Thorne sees me." "Thorne is a liar," Sophie snapped, pulling out her smartphone. "I went back and checked the timestamp on that viral video I took of you. It was recorded at 4:15 p.m. on Tuesday. Vane claims you stole the key and sneaked in at midnight. But in the background of my video, you can clearly see the janitor, Mr. Henderson, waxing the floor in the hallway. If he was there, he saw who really went into that room." "Mr. Henderson won't talk," Maya said, shaking her head. "He's scared of Thorne." "Everyone is." "Then we make him brave," Sophie said, grabbing Maya's coat from the hook and tossing it to her. "Silas is in the ICU fighting for his life because he stood up for you. Are you going to let him do that alone?" The mention of Silas pierced through Maya's numbness. She looked at the rosary on the table, then at the fire in Sophie's eyes. Slowly, she zipped up her coat. The drive to Oak Creek Academy was tense and silent. Snow swirled in the headlights of Sophie's luxury SUV. When they arrived, the campus was glowing with festive lights for the winter charity gala. Limousines were already idling near the front entrance, dropping off donors in tuxedos and gowns. But Sophie drove around to the dark loading dock at the back of the East Wing. Mr. Henderson was there, hauling bags of trash into the dumpster. He looked tired, his breath steaming in the frigid air. When he saw Maya, he dropped the bag, his face crumbling with guilt. "I heard about Mr. Fletcher," Henderson said, his voice thick. I didn't want him to get hurt." "Then help us fix it," Maya pleaded, stepping into the circle of light from the security lamp. "You were there, Mr. Henderson." "Who went into the music room?" The old janitor looked at his boots, wrestling with his fear. Finally, he looked up, his eyes wet. "It was Miss Vane. She came in around 11:30. She had a toolbox. She told me to take a break on the other side of the building if I wanted to keep my job." "We need proof," Sophie said urgently. "The security logs." "They're digital," Henderson warned. "Password protected." Sophie smiled grimly. "My dad is the board president. He uses his birthday for everything." They slipped into the building through the service entrance, moving like shadows through the empty corridors of the East Wing. The distant sound of a string quartet tuning up in the main auditorium drifted through the vents the gala was starting. They reached the small, windowless security office. Sophie sat at the main terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She typed in a code. The screen flashed red, then green. Access granted. Got it, Sophie whispered. She scrolled through the entry logs for the music wing. There. Tuesday, 11:42 p.m. Administrator override, K. Vane. We have them. Maya breathed, relief washing over her. We can prove she did it. Wait. Sophie frowned, her eyes scanning a subfolder labeled Archive, Restricted. Why is your last name flagged in the system? Robinson. She clicked on the file. It was an old scanned document from 2007, yellowed with age but legible on the high-definition screen. Maya leaned in, reading over Sophie's shoulder. It was a disciplinary report titled Misappropriation of Department Funds. The accused was Sophia Robinson, Maya's mother. But it wasn't the accusation that made Maya's blood run cold. It was the details. The report claimed Sophia had stolen $2,000 from the instrument fund. But at the bottom, in the section marked Investigating Officer, was a signature Maya recognized from her own suspension notice. Marcus Thorne, Assistant Principal. And beneath that, a small, handwritten note in the margins, likely forgotten by time. Transfer complete to personal ACCT number 4490 MT. The realization hit Maya with the force of a physical blow. He didn't just fire her, she whispered, her voice trembling with a new, white-hot rage. He framed her. He stole the money himself, and he pinned it on my mother to cover his tracks. He destroyed her whole life for $2,000. And now he's doing the exact same thing to you because you remind him of his crime, Sophie said, her voice hard as steel. She plugged a USB drive into the console and downloaded everything: the logs, the video, the 2007 file. She pulled the drive out and turned to Maya. The fear in the room had vanished, replaced by a clarity that was sharp and dangerous. They weren't just two teenagers anymore. They were the reckoning. Sophie checks her watch. The gala starts in 45 minutes. Thorne is about to give his speech. Put on your dress, Maya. We're going to a party. The Oak Creek auditorium glittered with diamonds, expensive cologne, and deceit, totally unaware that a storm was about to enter through the stage doors. It was the night of the Winter Charity Gala, the social event of the season for the Virginia elite. The cavernous hall had been transformed into a winter wonderland, with white velvet draping the walls and snowflake gobas spinning slowly across the ceiling. Hundreds of wealthy donors, parents, and board members sat at round tables laden with silver candelabras, sipping champagne and waiting to be impressed. At the center of the stage, flanked by two towering spruce trees, stood the replacement piano, a sleek, concert black Yamaha that shone under the spotlights like a dark jewel. Principal Marcus Thorne stood at the podium, basking in the applause. He looked impeccable in his tuxedo, the picture of a benevolent leader. He adjusted the microphone, flashing his practiced, politician's smile. Thank you, Thorne said, his voice smooth as silk. Tonight is about excellence. It is about the legacy of Oak Creek. We pride ourselves on nurturing the finest minds and the purest talents. He paused for dramatic effect, his face growing somber. Sadly, due to a violent incident of vandalism involving a troubled student, our scholarship candidate could not be here tonight. It is a reminder that not everyone possesses the moral fiber required to be part of our community. A sympathetic murmur rippled through the crowd. Thorne nodded, accepting their pity, ready to introduce the next act. But before he could speak, a heavy metallic clunk echoed from the wings. The stage door swung open. Maya Robinson walked out. She wasn't wearing a designer gown like the other students. She wore a simple dark blue dress that she had mended herself, the fabric faded but clean. She didn't have professional makeup or jewelry. But as she walked into the blinding glare of the spotlights, she held her head high, her spine straight, moving with a dignity that silenced the room instantly. Thorne froze. His eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in fury. He tapped the microphone frantically. Security. Remove this student immediately. She is trespassing. He gestured wildly to the guards stationed at the sides, But as he opened his mouth to shout again, the sound system died. The microphone went dead silent. High up in the technical booth, visible only as a silhouette against the glowing control panel, Sophie pulled the master fader down. She locked eyes with Thorne from across the vast hall and gave a tiny, defiant nod. Without a word, Maya walked past the fuming principal. She didn't look at him. He was a ghost to her now. She sat at the piano bench, adjusting it slightly. The silence in the auditorium was thick, suffocating. People were whispering, confused, looking from the angry principal to the girl in the cheap dress. Maya placed her hands on the keys. She took a breath that went all the way down to her soul, inhaling the scent of pine and floor wax, and exhaling the fear of 16 years. Then she played. It wasn't a Christmas carol. It wasn't Mozart. It was the truth. It began with a low, rumbling chord in the left hand, dark, ominous, sounding like the heavy steps of authority. Then the right hand entered, fragile and high, a lonely melody that shivered like a child in the snow. It was the sound of being cold, of being hungry, of being ignored. The audience stopped whispering. They leaned in, captivated by the raw, naked emotion pouring out of the instrument. As the music built, Maya closed her eyes. She wasn't playing for the scholarship anymore. She was playing for the broken upright in the dust. She was playing for Silas, lying in a hospital bed with tubes in his arms. She was playing for her mother, Sophia, whose name had been erased from this very stage. The music shifted. The fragility turned into strength. The tempo accelerated, evolving into a complex, stormy fusion of gospel and jazz, the music of her ancestors, the music of resilience. Her fingers flew across the keys, blurring with speed, striking the notes with a power that seemed impossible for her slender frame. It was a roar of defiance, a demand to be heard. At the exact moment the music reached its crescendo, the massive projection screen behind the stage flickered to life. Thorne turned around, horrified. It wasn't the school logo. It was a video. The timestamp read, Tuesday, 11:42 p.m. The image was grainy but undeniable. It showed Vice Principal Karen Vane entering the music room with a toolbox. It showed her kneeling before the piano. It showed the wire cutters. A collective gasp went up from the audience. A woman in the front row dropped her champagne glass. It shattered, the sound lost under the thunder of Maya's playing. Thorne lunged toward the piano to stop her, but two large figures stepped out of the shadows to block him. It was the security guards, but they weren't looking at Maya. They were looking at the screen. The image changed. A scanned document appeared, blown up to the size of a billboard. 2007 disciplinary report. The name Sophia Robinson. And zoomed in high definition, the signature of Marcus Thorne and the handwritten note about the bank transfer. The music stopped. Maya hit the final chord, a C major that rang out like a gavel striking a judge's bench. She let her hands rest on the keys, the vibration traveling up her arms, warming her blood. The auditorium was dead silent for one heartbeat. 2. Then, the school board president, Sophie's father, stood up. His face was pale with rage, his eyes fixed on Thorne. Marcus, he boomed, his voice projecting without a microphone. Is this true? Thorne stood center stage, stripped of his power, sweating under the lights that now felt like an interrogation lamp. He looked at the screen, then at the wealthy donors who were looking at him with disgust. He opened his mouth to lie, to spin, to charm, but no words came. He was small. He was naked. He was finished. The applause started from the back. It wasn't polite golf claps. It was a roar. It started with the students, then the parents, then the donors. They stood up, wave after wave, cheering not just for the music, but for the truth. Thorne is escorted off stage by security as the applause for Maya shakes the rafters. Later, Maya sits by a hospital bed, holding Silas's hand. We did it, Mr. Silas. They heard us. The applause in Oak Creek eventually faded, but the truth revealed that snowy night will echo in the town's memory forever. Maya's courage reminds us that dignity does not shout. It sings, and we must never let a ragged coat blind us to the brilliance of a beautiful soul. Like a diamond hidden in the dust, the most precious gifts often wait quietly for someone kind enough to notice them. If this story warmed your heart, please take a moment to listen to the quiet voices around you. They might just be playing the melody you've been waiting to hear.